As Director of the Gutenberg Teaching Council of Johannes Gutenberg University, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this admittedly slightly weird, purely virtual award ceremony. The Gutenberg Teaching Council is comprised of 20 members of the university, coming from all faculties, and is tasked with strategic consulting in matters of teaching, with funding innovative teaching projects, and with awarding several teaching prizes, such as the Gutenberg Teaching Award, which has been awarded since 2014. The Gutenberg Teaching Award goes to an individual who has contributed greatly to method development in teaching, or to the significant improvement in the quality of teaching at a university level. This year's award ceremony sees two laureates, Professor Geoffrey Brennan, who receives the Gutenberg Teaching Award for the year 2018 for his interdisciplinary teaching efforts, in particular for the development of a curriculum that covers the disciplines of philosophy, politics, and economics, or rather spans them, and for his continued efforts in supporting young researchers, young teachers. Unfortunately, due to personal reasons, Professor Brennan could not join us in Mainz in the year 2019, so the award ceremony was postponed until 2020. Our second laureate today is Professor Mills Kelly, who receives the award for his contributions to didactic concepts, as well as to his contributions to, in particular, digital methods of teaching, in particular of history. Professor Kelly has also been known to use also unconventional means to integrate students into long-term projects in between teaching and research, fostering their skills, in particular in the area of digital literacy. The Gutenberg Teaching Award comes with an invitation to spend time in Mainz and to help inspire our teachers and to help our teachers to learn from the example of our laureates. Unfortunately, due to the current pandemic, we cannot hold these visits in the year 2020 as we had hoped, but we are very much looking forward to hosting Professor Brennan and Professor Kelly in the year 2021 if circumstances allow us. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for watching or participating in this virtual award ceremony.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, members and friends of our university from all over the world, I would like to warmly welcome you to this year's Gutenberg Teaching Award ceremony. Due to the unique circumstances, this year we are unfortunately unable to personally welcome the prize winners at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, as is our usual custom. However, I am very pleased that we have nevertheless found a way to honor two outstanding and innovative teachers by way of this digital award ceremony, and would therefore like to extend a particularly warm welcome to the winner of Gutenberg Teaching Award 2018, Dr. Geoffrey Brennan from Australian National University, who was unable to attend the award ceremony last year, and to Dr. T. Mills Kelly from George Mason University, this year's award winner. Even though this year's ceremony is somewhat unconventional, it is a great pleasure to be able to honor both of you in this way. The University of Mainz has had a long history of teaching since its founding in 1477, during the time of Johannes Gutenberg, whose invention of the movable type printing press had just begun to revolutionize the spread of information. In the beginning, scholars at the University of Mainz taught a wide range of subjects, including not only the traditional medieval disciplines of theology, medicine and law, but also the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, dialectics, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy and music. Despite occasional turbulent periods, the University of Mainz continued on for more than 300 years until 1798, when Mainz was occupied during the French Revolutionary Wars, bringing teaching to a halt. In the wake of World War II, the French military government helped rebuild the university and reopen its doors again nearly 150 years after its closing on May 15, 1946, Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz, named after the city's most famous son, resumed its teaching activities. Today, Johannes Gutenberg University is internationally recognized and well known for its achievements in research and teaching. With about 31,000 students from over 120 countries, it is one of the large universities in Germany and brings together almost every academic discipline under a single roof, including the Mainz University Medical Center, a School of Music and the Mainz Academy of Fine Arts, while also housing 4 partner research institutions that conduct cutting-edge research outside of the organizational structure of the university itself. Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz strives to promote and implement innovative ideas, to help improve people's living conditions through study and research, to facilitate their access to education and science, and to encourage people to meet and overcome the many challenges they encounter on a daily basis. On behalf of the entire university, we would be very happy to personally welcome you, Dr. Brennan, and you, Dr. Kelly, at our university here in Mainz at a later date. I'm looking forward to your visit so that we can mutually benefit from personal exchange and stimulating discussions.
Dear colleagues, students, friends, dear viewers, wherever you may be, it is a great pleasure to introduce to you our Gutenberg Teaching Awardee 2018, Professor Geoffrey Brennan. Let me try to make those of you who don't know him yet understand why he was selected to receive this award, or rather, why it is an honor for us to have him on our honors list. Now, Geoffrey Brennan will not like this. He is a brilliant scholar and teacher, and in my experience, that necessarily comes with a high degree of personal modesty, of not taking oneself too seriously, and of acknowledging the limitations of one's knowledge. So I'm sure our awardee would much prefer a critical exchange of ideas to hearing his praise sung here. Here we have one of the disadvantages of a video. We will never know whether he'll simply skip watching this part. In a real award ceremony, he would have no choice but to suffer through it, as he should. And this is one more reason to regret that he's not with us today, but we have to deal with this, and so let me go on. At Johannes Gutenberg University, we strongly believe in research-based teaching. Hence, in order to appreciate our awardee's exceptional teaching record, we first need to turn to his work as a scholar. He's an economist by training. He earned a PhD in economics at the ANU in 1976. But from very early on, his research interests have carried him far beyond conventional economics, into the field of PPE. Now, this acronym has recently gained prominence with a very different meaning. But it has a long tradition in the social sciences and humanities. And there it stands for a particular pluridisciplinary approach to the analysis, the explanation, and the assessment of social phenomena in all kinds of contexts. Geoffrey Brennan himself will tell us a bit more about it shortly. But for a start, a quick look merely at the titles of some of his major publications may provide an instructive shortcut to what he does, to the disciplines he straddles, and the range of topics he takes on. So look. The Reason of Rules, Constitutional Political Economy. That early book explicitly suggests an economist's view, though not at the conventional objects of economic research, markets, commodities, finances, and the like, but more generally at fundamental social and political institutions as rules are, which are also the topic of the more recent collaborative work Explaining Norms. On the other hand, Democracy and Decision, or Democratic Devices and Desires, point specifically towards political science and political philosophy and the theory of democracy. So in a nutshell, gaining insights into political and more generally social phenomena with the help of philosophical and economic tools. That's what PPE is about. Now keep looking at those title pages, And you'll discover another remarkable feature of our awardee, a feature that is relevant for PPE research as well as for teaching. And that is his consistent willingness and ability to cooperate with others. If you easily look up his co-authors on the web, you will immediately see he collaborates across disciplines, across continents, but also across leagues, if you will, with old and young, with beginners and experts, with Nobel laureates and students alike. And Geoffrey Brennan does all this exceptionally well. There's overwhelming evidence for that, and I can pick out only a few selected items to support my judgment. Starting in the late 70s, as a professor of economics at Virginia Tech in the United States, he returned to Australia in the 80s to do what? To head the Department of Economics at the ANU. Now, for a non-conventional economist, as Geoff Brennan had by then become, the recognition that position implied can hardly be overstated, as economists watching this will certainly know. But that was just the beginning. A few years later, he transferred from the economics department to the ANU's Research School of Social Sciences, the famous RSSS, one of the best institutes of advanced studies in social and political theory and philosophy on the globe. And you may by now not be surprised to hear that it didn't take long until Geoffrey Brennan was made director of this renowned research school. This was in the 90s, and he headed it for half a decade. Today, he is Professor Emeritus at the RSSS School of Philosophy, but that has not reduced his esteem among economists, which is a miracle by itself. For example, in 2013, the Economic Society of Australia made him their Distinguished Fellow of the Year. So much for his excellence as a scholar. But you will rightly ask, where's the teaching in all this? Well, it's right there. He practices what we believe in, research-based teaching. During his early years at the research school, this applied mainly to the supervision of a constant flow of international graduate students who were writing their dissertations about PPE-ish topics, and many of whom have gone on to important academic positions themselves. And he could have left it at that, but he didn't. He's one of the not so many excellent scholars who strongly care about teaching. He does it voluntarily, beyond his obligations, very hard to believe for a German professor. So at an age when others start thinking of retirement and tending their gardens, Geoffrey Brennan agreed to leave his comfortable scholar's paradise down under in order to develop, implement, and direct a PPE program for undergraduates in the United States. And to make this task a bit more challenging, this was to be not only an interdisciplinary, but also an interinstitutional program. Now, those of you who tried to breathe academic life into the joint enterprise of the Rhine-Main universities will know what this means. Geoffrey Brennan managed to convince colleagues from two high-profile local rivals, Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is just across the road, so to speak, to establish a joint program, I think their first joint program ever, the joint Duke-UNC PPE program. For a decade or so, he thus spent half of each year as professor of economics at the ANU, and the other half teaching undergraduates in North Carolina, as distinguished research professor of philosophy at the UNC, and research professor of political science at Duke. He did this until the program was well established and extremely successful. Then he left it to others. In the meantime, his home university realized the potential of such a program, and Geoffrey Brennan did it all over again and recently established the PPE program at the ANU. And unfortunately, I can't go into the details of these programs, which are pretty different, but Geoffrey Brennan will tell us a bit about them just in a minute. Hopefully he will tell us much more when international travel is possible again, and we'll get a chance to have him in Mainz and engage him in real discussion. So let me end this on the following note. Our aspiration at Johannes Gutenberg University is the Gutenberg spirit, moving minds, crossing boundaries. Geoffrey Brennan has been crossing boundaries and moving minds for decades. He personifies the Gutenberg spirit in an exemplary fashion. So the Gutenberg Teaching College could not have chosen a more fitting awardee. Thank you.
Hello, Professor Brennan. It's a pleasure to introduce you to our viewers by the wonders of modern technology across continents and across time zones and across seasons. It's a winter evening in Australia and a summer morning in Mainz. But we can do this and talk pleasantly, I hope, about your work, especially in the teaching of PPE. Our viewers already know that you're not teaching how to put on protective gear.
Good.
PPE is something different. But would you please tell our viewers a little bit more about what PPE means?
Well, PPE is the enterprise of, in this case, teaching of philosophy, politics, and economics in juxtaposition with one another. So to give a contrast, the old PPE style, which is characterised by what happens at the University of Oxford, essentially students do philosophy, politics and economics, but they do them as basically separate and parallel streams. The idea of PPE teaching is to try to integrate the three disciplines in some way to allow the different perspectives, ways of thinking and subject matter to inform each other and, well, to increase the breadth of perspective of the students.
So what does encourage a university to offer a PPE course? What's in it for the university to do this on the one hand? And on the other hand, what's in it for the students? Why should students, or why do students choose a PPE program?
Well, the question of intra-university politics, as it were, what's in it for the various departments and the university as a whole is an interesting question. I think in the American experience, anyway, most of the PPE programs emerge from philosophy departments. They do so because philosophy departments are short of students. They want to lure students into philosophy, and they think that doing philosophy in association with politics and economics is more practical, gives the air that this is good preliminary for law school. It just is attractive to students, and it's attractive to philosophy departments partly because the other ways of generating student numbers, like business ethics or medical ethics, are usually one unit or small courses in a larger enterprise which is focused on something else, and where most of the students, frankly, are rather reluctant participants, whereas PPE turns out to be very popular by students. What's in it for the students? Well, there are two sorts of things, ways of answering that question. One is what the students themselves perceive, which is, I think, that they can do something intellectually interesting, where the big questions of climate change and COVID and, the whole range of the way in which political institutions are organised, all these issues are on the agenda in a way that they, interestingly, tend not to be in, well, particularly in economics. So, for example, lots of students go into economics classes because they think, well, I want to understand about redistribution and I want to understand about economic justice and the big questions, and they're not taught those things so much. That you have to wait until you've done all the basic principles and the intermediate analysis before you can get to the applications, whereas in PPE we do tend to engage, as I would call them, the big questions right from the outset. I think students find that attractive. I mean, in the American case, there's also this issue about preparation for law school, and lots of kids who do PPE do end up in law schools. About 40% of the kids at UNC, as I recall, see themselves as destined for law school, and they're looking around for, a liberal arts degree that's got a bit of focus and they think will be good preparation for law school, and PPE fits that bill.
That's very interesting to hear and very different from the German system, because in Germany, I think a prospective law student would not think about entering a PPE program. But since you mentioned Australia and the US especially, perhaps you can tell our viewers just a little bit about the different programs you've been engaged in before we get into the special problems and challenges that PPE teaching implies. So just let us know a little bit what the programs are that you have experience in.
So my own involvement with PPE began in a joint program between Duke and UNC in North Carolina, a program which I set up in 2005. That was an initiative which had partly come out of an interest that the then provost, equivalent of a vice-chancellor in Australia, had in developing PPE, and he knew that I was interested in that area, and so he took me to lunch and asked me what it would take to bring me to Duke to start up a PPE program, and I said it would take the involvement of the UNC philosophers, and so we put together a joint program across the two universities. That program was a little bit different between Duke and UNC, but basically it was what they call a minor. So it involved a relatively small number of courses, and it was a program that took all comers. So anyone who enrolled in PPE and we could accommodate, we would undertake. So it was open entry in that sense. Lots of the new emerging PPE programs in the United States are not like that. They're elite programs. They restrict entry to 30 students or maybe smaller numbers in some cases. And some of them teach much more in the Oxford method of, sort of seminars and small scale, 4 students at a time and so on, small tutorials. So there's no template for PPE actually, and when you look at the range of PPE programs, some of them are minors, some of them are majors. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in Australia in a minute, but some of them are restrictive, some of them are concentrated in philosophy, in the philosophy department, but some are in political science and some much, much rarer. 1 or 2, I think, have a strong economics base and originate in economics. In Australia, the Australian National University, we are doing now, we're I think in our 6th year of this program, we are actually doing the PPE program as a degree. So the idea is that the students would do a major, effectively 3-year study in each of the 3 components. That gets moderated a little bit because some of them are doing joint degrees and so on. But that's the ambition, so that when they come to try and put the bits together, as it were, try to interrogate philosophy from an economics point of view or economics from a political science point of view, they have some real disciplinary capital with which to do that. The difficulty at, well, let's say in the Duke UNC program is that many of the students are trying to, as it were, do an interdisciplinary exercise when their grasp on each of the component disciplines is rather thin.
Well, that's interesting to talk about this a little bit more. Before we get to the challenges of teaching, maybe let's take this question first. Because you're just mentioning the different ways students approach this. One approach would be more a general approach without any deep knowledge of any of the different disciplines. And the other approach would be students that have already done one discipline, got a bachelor's degree, I suppose, in one of the disciplines, and then go on to do the interdisciplinary program. In your experience, what would you say are the pros and cons of either of these approaches, or is it totally different purposes that are served by this, or would you say it's more interesting or more appropriate to do it on the basis of a disciplinary knowledge, or to do it rather for beginners so they get the different perspectives before they start doing a disciplinary degree? What's your opinion on these questions?
Yeah. My opinion on this issue has largely changed, or at least it's modified. So when I first began the program at Duke UNC, I was very strongly of the view that this should be an undergraduate program. And that's because I felt that at the graduate level, we really were not doing our students any professional favours by thinning out the disciplinary concentration. I mean, the truth of the matter is, at least in philosophy, but this is probably true in political science as well, most of the students who do graduate work in these disciplines aspire to an academic career. And if they're going to be academics, then they're going to be hired in academic departments who are looking for good philosophers, good political scientists. And at that stage, at least, I thought that the intrusion of economics and political science into a philosophy PhD program, for example, or a master's program preliminary to a PhD program, was just a mild form of professional suicide. Now that has changed, and that's changed largely because of the growth industry. And whereas, well, even 15 years ago, I think having done a bit of economics, doing political philosophy with a bit of game theory background and so on would have been regarded as kind of just irrelevant, and the way in which people in the philosophy department would regard doing game theory would be as epistemology or philosophy of mind foregone, and that was too big a cost. That I think has changed because the job market has changed. It's still true that ultimately, if you're in a department being hired to teach PPE, what the department wants is a good philosopher who can teach PPE. What they don't want is somebody who is, as it were, a PPE specialist, because the truth of the matter is that, you know, if you have some excellent articles in economics journals, which, but you're going up for tenure in a philosophy department, those things, you know, count less. They're peripheral to the enterprise of building the reputation of the department and so on. So my attitude originally was the time to get students doing PPE, forming the capacity to think through different disciplinary perspectives was at the undergraduate level. I think that, as I said, has significantly changed. Not entirely, But I think that the case for master's programs, which teach, let's say, economics to philosophers, there is now a niche market for that, and that might differ between educational jurisdictions. So that might be more suitable in Germany or in Australia than it is in say, the US. So that's really the trajectory. I mean, it's still the case, I think, and an important point, that PPE is, in some sense, by necessity, parasitic on the disciplines. It's a lot of interdisciplinary work is really non-disciplinary in a way. People take a bit from here and a bit from there. Policy studies is often like this. You take a little bit of normative analysis from philosophy and a little bit of political science and a little bit of economics, and you put them all together, and that's policy studies. PPE is not really like that. It's respectful of the disciplines and the authority of the disciplines. And I think the best work in research, this is not so much about the teaching aspect, but the best work in research in PPE is done by economists and philosophers, economists and political scientists working together, actually doing collaborative work, rather than, a couple of, sort of jacks of all trades trying to do both things.
Okay, let's come to the challenges of teaching, as you just announced that they exist. I think our viewers will be very interested in hearing a little bit more about how you go about those challenges. What are these challenges in the first place? You said some kind of imagination, putting yourself into the shoes of the other disciplines in a way, even though you're a specialist in economics. You have to know a little bit about, or maybe more than a little bit about, philosophy and also about political science, but you're teaching economics in a PPE program. So what does that mean for your teaching, as opposed to teaching in a pure economics program, for example? What are the challenges, and what do you do to meet these challenges?
Well, that's the $64 question, really. I can tell you what the challenges are as I see them. Really, the challenge is to get students to be able to look at the world simultaneously through different disciplinary lenses. People often think of economics and political science in particular as disciplines that are defined by their subject matter. So, and that's more true, actually, I think, of political science than it is of economics. So let's just take economics as an example. When people say they're studying economics, they think, an outsider would think, oh yeah, they're studying incomes and prices and unemployment and the distribution of income, all these things that fall under the ambit of the economy broadly construed. But if you look at the journals, you'll find all these articles on the economics of suicide, or the economics of the family, or the economics of sex, or one popular topic, to say nothing of these larger enterprises like the economics of politics, in which, rational choice political theory, which I've been involved in, law and economics, the idea that there is an economic way of thinking about these things, which doesn't reduce to just, questions that are, as it were, narrowly economic in nature. That economics is not defined, I think, so much by its subject matter as by its way of thinking. Now, precisely what that way of thinking is, and imparting that to the students, in my view, is a necessary preliminary to doing proper interdisciplinary work, because the student has to be self-conscious about what they do in economics, for example. And often economics programs don't encourage that self-consciousness. So if you say, oh, I want to do some, I'm interested in methodology of this, or I'm interested in the implicit normative sort of aspects of economic inquiry, you're inclined to get discouraged from pursuing those questions. Look, your job, the lecturer is likely to say, not to understand too much or ask too many questions about what all this means. You just have to learn how to do it, right? And there's this mastery of technique that carries with it a certain does carry with it a certain way of thinking, certain implicit assumptions. Those assumptions need to be interrogated, but they need to be interrogated from, in my view, from a disciplinary base, from a way of inquiry about, well, what is it that we're doing that rubs up against philosophical insight, rubs up against what we know about politics from political science, in a way that's not just, undisciplined as we might.
Thanks very much. I think we need to cut it off here. Thank you very much for your availability to this interview. And since there have been a couple of technical problems, I think we're just anxiously awaiting the times when we can travel again and you can really come to Mainz and tell us much more about PPE and your interdisciplinary teaching and the challenges of it, and also the fun of it. I think our viewers could see how much fun it is for somebody like you to do this. Thanks very much. Have a pleasant evening down under. And see you soon.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That's very kind of you. It's been a great pleasure. And I will, once the constraints are non-operative, I will look forward to coming to Mainz and meeting with your students and with anyone else who's interested in.
Dear Mr. President and colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen on the other side of the screen, and above all, dear Professor Kelly. It's a great pleasure for me to explain why Mills Kelly was nominated and finally chosen for the Gutenberg Teaching Award. My name is Maike Hensel-Gruber. I'm a professor for the didactics of history. Let me start by quoting the website of the Gutenberg Teaching Council. It says that the overall selection criterion is, quote, that the nominee has made a significant contribution to the development of academic teaching. Well, this sentence can be transferred into a guiding question for my speech today, asking, what are Mills Kelly's creative and innovative approaches that result in a strong impact on students and teachers in higher education? Let me start with some general remarks and then move on to more detailed information. The Department of History and the Faculty of Historical and Culture Studies nominated Mills Kelly because of his merits in higher education, especially in the humanities. This includes his innovative methods in fostering students' digital and media literacy. It is probably not necessary to introduce Mills Kelly to you, but nevertheless, I will try to summarize the most important information. Mills Kelly is Professor of History at the George Mason University, Fairfax, Virginia. His scholarship focuses on European and East European history, as well as on environmental and public history. Mills Kelly is also the Executive Director of the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University, combining his interests in public history and historical pedagogy. He is a member of the advisory board of the international blog journal Public History Weekly and a member of the presidential team of the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. He travels all around the world to establish teaching and learning in higher education as a scholarly endeavor, to share and to discuss his teaching and learning concepts with others. Mills Kelly has already received several teaching awards. Together with his colleagues, he created website projects that won prizes For instance, the James Harvey Robinson Prize from the American Historical Association. That is, the largest national professional organization for historians. The interactive platforms Making the History of 1989 and Women in World History are good examples for these kind of projects. They provide scholarly reviews, primary source archives, case studies and teaching resources for higher education, as well as forums for online discussions on teaching matters. The September 11 digital archive with various opportunities for active participation is another example to show how Ms. Kelly and his colleagues aim to democratize history by the means of digital humanities. This is one of the attitudes he wants to convey to his students. Therefore, he develops teaching methods that foster their digital literacy and that encourage them to combine historical research and community engagement. The promotion of digital literacy is a constantly expressed demand these days. The standard work on this topic in our discipline was written by Ms. Kelly. Teaching History in the Digital Age, first published in 2013, is superb. At least that is what a critic said, and I agree, because the author is already 1 or 2 steps ahead, acknowledging in his teaching strategies that there is no divide between an analog and a digital world for young people. The book starts with a both funny and serious anecdote in which a student argued that his digitally revised version of a source was better than the original one. And then Ms. Kelly describes the crucial insight he gained at that point. That day I realized I had missed a very significant change in the way my students thought about learning, about the production of historical knowledge and about the nature of historical evidence. Well, if this weren't the sterile atmosphere of a video, but a face-to-face event, you would probably ask, how does that affect his teaching? Ms. Kelly applies not only new, but also provocative methods. As far as I know, he's the only historian in higher education who became famous by elaborating historical hoaxes with his students in order to intensify their reflection on the nature of historical sources and to deepen their discussion about the importance of careful research and about the ethical issues in the digital world. Ms. Kelly challenges his students to approach their subjects in an experiential way without neglecting sourcing and contextualization. The best example is his recent project, The Digital History of the Appalachian Trail. That is America's first and most visited long-distance hiking trail. Part of the project is a collaboration with undergraduate students who analyze historical topics and publish their findings in digital exhibits. Ms. Kelly's scholarly interests are not only directed towards the history of the trail, but also to didactical questions. He explores the importance of community-engaged learning to students' acquisition of historical knowledge and methodology. He has already published numerous articles on this intersection of historical pedagogy and digital humanities. I hope that all of you who watched this video got an idea why Ms. Kelly is such an excellent and outstanding award recipient. His works combine all criteria: standard textbook, dedication to research-based teaching, scholarship in teaching and learning, and interdisciplinary innovative concepts. Dear Professor Kelly, we are very pleased that the Gutenberg Teaching Council followed our nomination. So let me finish by expressing our warmest congratulations on winning the Gutenberg Teaching Award 2019. We are looking forward to the workshops and mutual exchange during your visit to Mainz. And thank you all for your attention.
Let me begin by saying that we are really proud to honor your long-standing engagement in higher education with the Gutenberg Teaching Award. And we are really sad to celebrate this award in a video conference and not in person. We hope to see you in Mainz next year, and we promise to celebrate the award appropriately then, as it is supposed to be. Since the late 1990s, you have been working in a field called the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Looking at higher education in Germany today, most colleagues in the humanities probably never heard of this Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Why should they know about it, and what is it about?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for honoring me with this award. It's really just, I'm touched and honored to be selected for this very important recognition. And so to answer your question, so the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is an emerging discipline, emerging in the sense that it's been around for almost 25 years, which is new in higher education by our standards. And the purpose of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is to use disciplinary methods of research to try to understand how it is that students learn particular disciplinary knowledge. So how is it that history students learn about the past and learn historical thinking skills? How is it that chemistry students learn analytical skills in the chemistry lab? Because schools of education have typically focused on K-12 students and what happens in the primary and secondary schools, and there hasn't been a lot of attention to what kind of learning happens in the higher education classroom, both for undergrads and graduate students. And so that's what we're doing in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, but we're doing it not as educational researchers, but as disciplinary researchers. So we apply our own habits of mind to this work. And it helps us not only be better teachers, but also better transmitters of our discipline to future generations.
Mm-hmm. In the announcement of our ceremony on the website of the George Mason University, you talked about the fact that our award has been granted to winners from different disciplines, as you have been president of the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning for 3 years. What would this interdisciplinary diversity mean to you, and what benefit could we expect from this kind of interdisciplinary exchange?
That's a wonderful question, because it's one of the most exciting parts of this kind of work, because we're able to, as scholars in various disciplines, we're able to then try to find a common language to discuss student learning and student learning outcomes. And so we have these incredibly rich conversations across disciplinary boundaries about common challenges. And I give you a very specific example. In every discipline, we struggle with our students over what might be called the mountain of evidence problem, that novice learners, if they look at two piles of evidence and one of them is small and one of them is large, well, the large pile of evidence must be the one to look at because there's a lot of evidence there. It doesn't mean that it's better evidence, it's just more. And so chemists struggle with this problem, historians struggle with this problem, people in linguistics struggle with this problem. And so the interdisciplinary nature of our work in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning lets us have conversations about problems like that. And what results from that is really exciting.
Okay, thank you. Another keyword to describe your engagement in higher education might be a community-engaged learning. Could you tell us what that means in your own environment and why it might be useful or meaningful in higher education in Europe?
Yeah, community engagement has really been central to everything that I've done the last 25 years as an educator. And I think it's really important because only a tiny fraction of our students will go on to be experts in our discipline, academicians, senior researchers in laboratories or archives or whatever. Most of them will become active citizens in their society. And so if we can help them understand about how the work that they do as students in the university is connected to what matters in the communities around them, then after they graduate with whether it's an undergraduate degree or a master's degree, they can go on to apply that learning in their communities, make those communities better places. So for instance, I have my students work with local voluntary organizations that care about history. and because I'm a historian, and so they're regularly in contact with community volunteers and community organizations, and this enriches both the students but also the community, and so that's why I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. And that leads to another question. Your intense activity for the Appalachian Trail, which includes work with students as well, and the Appalachian Trail has been opened this week, I heard. How would you describe the value of this kind of off-campus learning for academic studies in the humanities?
So I guess you would say that I have a bit of a romanticist vision of student learning. I don't know, Goethe was a big influence on me, and so I think that there's a tremendous value in having students be in the places where historical events happened. And colleagues of mine, we debate about this, but I think that I personally believe that students, if they go to a place where something from the past happened, then it ignites something in their brain which gets them to think a little bit differently than they would if they were reading a text or looking at an image or whatever. So because my research on the history of this recreational resource, the Appalachian Trail, is so involved with the physicality of exercise and being in nature, and the trail is very close to our campus. It's only a 1-hour drive away. So I take my students there and we go for a hike and we experience what hikers experience on this trail, and we talk about the history of the place as we're walking through that space. And you can just see it in their faces. They're thinking differently, and their imaginations are fired in ways that they wouldn't be in an archive or a library. Other kinds of excitement happen in an archive and a library. It's just different, that's all.
Okay, so the year 2020 will be marked in history books as the year of digital teaching in higher education.
Yeah.
Your book, Teaching History in the Digital Age, was published in 2013. And it's still a benchmark for texts about teaching in the humanities in a world deeply coined by processes of digitalization. Our Chancellor Angela Merkel said some years ago, this internet is uncharted territory for all of us. She was right insofar as politics is still trying to cope with the dangers and challenges of the digital age. Do you think this is valid as well for humanities? Are there still some territories to explore?
Oh, I think there are many unexplored territories, and in particular, as larger and larger numbers of archival materials become available online, we become overwhelmed by the volume. Tens of millions of primary sources available now to work with, and that's just impossible. Using the methods that you and I were trained with of taking each document and carefully analyzing it one at a time. But we can't do that for 10 million sources or 50 million sources. And so the computational methods that are beginning to emerge in the humanities for analyzing large sets of historical data or data in literature or whatever, those methods are beginning to expose some really new and interesting things in those sources by distant reading instead of close reading. And so that's a big unexplored field. And then the second is, just to give a very simple example, as we scan tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and eventually millions of photographic images, as well as I do, we don't know who most of those people are in those photographs. And but algorithmic searching with artificial intelligence is beginning to turn up suggestions about who that might be in the photograph. And so that alone is pointing us to new ways of thinking about the archival materials we're looking at. So I think that the technology is really going to change a lot of the way that we think about archives. And in my book, I only scratched on that a little bit. And so because the AI was not so much a part of the conversation at that time, but now it is.
So we are now waiting for a second volume of the book, I guess.
Right.
Let's get to the heart. Yeah, let's get to the heart of the matter. History education at university. Which message would you deliver to future history teachers, to students of history? What is history education all about?
Well, I think history education is all about helping our students understand what it means to be human, and and how they are situated in space and time in their particular society and in a global society. And so, history is really about the big questions like that. And so at the same time, history education is about creativity and giving our students the opportunity to be creative. And this is, in my book, this is one of my critiques of what we as historians have done as teachers over the last century. And we've stifled a lot of student creativity. And so the book, in the conclusion, it's a plea for history teachers, history faculty to give our students the opportunity to be more creative in the ways that they think about the past, the ways that they work with evidence from the past, and what kind of knowledge they produce from that creativity.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about a totally different topic. Your Twitter account is full of beautiful nature photography. Which significance does aesthetics have for your work and your view on history and the world around you?
Well, that sort of connects with what I was just saying about creativity, and that is that one of the first pedagogical texts I ever read was by Comenius, and Comenius was a long time ago now, and he talked about he was very modern for being early modern, and he talked a lot about activating all the parts of the brain. And so for me, it's very important with my students to give them the opportunity to activate all the different parts of their brain, including, and we do a lot of this. We show them visual materials. We have them read text. We have them listen to music or whatever. But I think all of our students are creative in some way. And so to have them get in touch with their own aesthetics, their own aesthetic sensibilities, I think is really important in helping them to think about the past in new ways and to think about their own learning and their own ways of knowing in new ways.
Mm. Well, looking at the present, I started the interview with that. Are there any lessons to be learned from teaching in times of COVID-19 for future learning scenarios? And if there are some, what would be the top 3 of them?
Okay, the top 3, because there are many. And so, and of course, the one that everyone recognizes at the moment is that digital teaching is a lot harder than they thought it was. And so, but that's not so much a lesson. That's more of just an understanding. I would say that my top lesson would be that it's not the same. It's simply not the same. Teaching in the way that you and I are talking right now is not the same as being in a classroom with students and having them interact with one another, being able to have conversations that become much more spontaneous. That's just very difficult in this digital environment. And so we have to plan digital teaching with the understanding that it's not the same. And so we have to say, well, what can we do in this digital environment that helps us advance our students' learning? And so that's the first. So don't try to take your old course and jam it into your laptop and hope that it will turn out to be the same, because it simply won't. The second is that this is often very difficult for our students. We assume that just because they're young, they're very good with the technology, they can make their fingers fly across the laptop board or their phones. But in fact, they really struggle with internet connections, with the availability of Wi-Fi where they live or where they work, and or organizing their time or paying attention in this kind of mode. And so the second big lesson I would say is to understand that this is hard for them, for many of them. And so we have to be a little more forgiving. And because they've spent their entire lives as students learning how to learn in a classroom, and suddenly we've thrown them out of the classroom and told them they have to learn on a laptop, and that's very challenging. And then the third is that I think this gives us an opportunity to think creatively as educators about what we might do new and different in this environment. And I don't really have a good answer for that at the moment, but I think that over the next couple of years, all of us will do some very creative work around that. And what emerges will be, I think, exciting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would like to conclude by looking ahead into the future. We are looking forward to your stay in Mainz next year. What would you like to discuss with us, and what would you like to learn from us?
So first of all, I want to say I'm incredibly excited about coming to Mainz, and so disappointed that I am not there right now. And so and in particular, I'm excited about the opportunity to learn from my new colleagues in Mainz, and because I find that some of the biggest impacts on my own practice as an educator come from conversations around a table with some coffee, or walking through the streets, or sitting in a seminar room where we talk about how students learn in your local environment, and I talk about how they learn in mine, and we begin to share those stories, because as educators we're very good at stories, and so as we share those stories with each other, things emerge that we find, common threads emerge from those stories. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm also really looking forward to meeting with some of the advanced graduate students there who are planning careers as researchers and educators, and talking to them about their own career trajectories. And so that to me is going to be really exciting as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mills, thanks a lot for your patience with this unusual award ceremony, for your collaboration, and for the fruitful exchange of ideas and experiences we've already had over the last month, and will try to continue in the next month and next year. See you in 2021, I hope.
Yes, and I am so looking forward to that. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, members and friends of Johannes Gutenberg University, and especially dear laureates of our Gutenberg Teaching Award. It is my honor as a Vice President for Teaching and Learning to be able to make some closing remarks at the end of this digital ceremony. What characterizes good teaching? As a matter of course, the purpose of a teaching award is to honor those who excel in teaching and perhaps even contribute to an exemplary way to the overall field, thereby helping other teachers improve their skills. So far, a teaching award seems to be the prize won in a competition and teaching a comparable set of skills. Simply put, however, teaching is not like running. You can't just say the faster the better, the fastest runner wins the race. Teaching is not about finding the most efficient, the most elegant, perhaps most clear-cut solution to a problem. As a literary scholar, I am likely influenced by my perspective of my discipline, but to my understanding, the quality of teaching cannot be easily measured, if at all. It cannot be reduced to mere outcomes. So, how do we know if someone excels at teaching? What makes a good teacher, and in particular, a good academic teacher? Despite giving it much thought during my time as a lecturer and member of the academic self-administration, I'm still not quite sure if I have any answer to this question, and to be honest, I doubt there is a universal answer or a set of attributes characterizing a good teacher, no matter the situation, the topic, the specific area of knowledge, the group of students, and so on. So why is good teaching to be honored? I would even go so far to say that there isn't a universal method of good teaching. Nevertheless, I am firmly convinced that good teaching must be honored. To my mind, a good teacher is recognized by her or his constant efforts to find the right means of providing learning opportunities, fostering discussions, and supporting learners in facing new challenges, helping them develop their potential. And with this in mind, it seems evident why we can't measure good teaching regardless of setting, discipline, learning environment, and group. And on the other hand, the ability to be a good teacher is not an innate gift bestowed you at birth. Effective teaching can be learned. And since it is dependent on one's ability to react to a particular teaching setting, it is a practice which must constantly be examined, a practice that needs collegial discourse for its development. Our Gutenberg Teaching Council is based on this conviction. With the Gutenberg Teaching Award, we honor those who stimulate the professional debate and the scholarship of teaching in a particular discipline and bring these aspects to our university to encourage the academic staff of Johannes Gutenberg University to become familiar with other concepts of learning and teaching and to provide opportunities for fruitful discussions and cooperation. My special thanks and appreciation go to our laureates, Geoffrey Brennan and Mills Kelly. Thank you for your contribution to the development of academic teaching. We are proud to honor you and your work with the Gutenberg Teaching Award. And as President Crouch already stated at the beginning of this digital ceremony, we would be happy to welcome you personally at our campus for didactic exchange and stimulating discussions at a later date. We extend this invitation not only to our award winners, but also to all members of the academic community willing to share their insights and ideas, helping to develop the future of learning and teaching. You're very welcome at Johannes Gutenberg University, virtually for now and in person as soon as possible. So thank you for your time.